The neighbors constantly gossiped about how quickly she had returned from the city, and not alone. But look at her. We know what she was studying in the city. There, the results of her studies are running around barefoot. What a disgrace. Well, at least her grandmother didn't live to see these days. She would have burned with shame if she were still alive. Gemma turned out to be such a party-goer, and even abandoned. But Rob will soon return and see his beloved. If Rob's mother was nearby, she always joins such conversation. What are you talking about, old ladies? She's not a match for my son. I've already written him everything. Skip willing. Rob will meet a nice and good girl there, and come back with a young wife. Gemma knew what the neighbors were gossiping about. Their children followed the young woman and her son, coming up with all sorts of nicknames for them, pouring water on them, and even throwing sand and stones at them. There was no one to complain to, and the children continued to torment Gemma with impunity. In the end, Gemma almost stopped appearing on the street and only went out if there was some necessity. After 4 long months, on a warm August evening, a young and handsome Marine appeared in the village. Rob walked down the street under the admiring stares of onlookers. His mother joyfully ran out to meet him. "Son, we've been waiting for you since Wednesday. I'd come in now? We'll sit at the table." "Yes, mother, of course. I'll just go for a minute," he said, heading towards her. His mother glared at him. "Do you want it to disgrace yourself?" "I won't allow it, son. I don't want you to talk or even think about that wretched woman." "Don't worry, Mum. I'll be quick," Rob said, gently pushing his mother aside and stepping out onto the street. Gemma was bathing her son and did not hear that someone entered. Rob stood watching her silently as she told the child a fairy tale. The child noticed him first and froze frightened. Gemma followed her son's gaze and seeing Rob straightened up to her full height. Now they stood side by side, silently staring into each other's eyes. In Rob's gaze, Gemma read a silent reproach and deeply hidden resentment. The woman raised her head proudly, but said nothing and didn't even change her expression. The silence was interrupted by little Peter, who loudly struck the water with his hands and laughed. Gemma regained her senses, wrapped a towel around the baby, and stepped past Rob into the room, brought him warm milk and put him to bed. Then she sat down next to him and started gently cradling him, humming softly. Rob was waiting nearby. The child fell asleep, and Gemma approached him. "Why are you silent? Do you judge me?" she asked. "I want to understand why you betrayed me, and with whom." "It's with him, little Peter." Gemma nodded toward the sleeping son. "You've known everything for a long time. Your mother probably wrote to you. For all years, I don't care what she wrote. I would like to hear you out and find out why you didn't write to me yourself and left my letters unanswered, since I didn't get anyway. Or maybe the mailman didn't think it was necessary to deliver the mail. Who knows? I sent a letter to you too, but now we understand that you didn't receive it. So please, sit down." Gemma sat down in a chair and motioned Rob to sit too. "After you're leaving, I moved to the city to study. Although I enjoyed it, my grandma was upset and missed me greatly. Recently, I lived in a dormitory, so I couldn't bring her with me. But that's not the point. It's my grief that stays with me. I have another thing to say. I lived with Megan in the dormitory room. She was a cheerful and carefree girl who came to the college not to study, but to enjoy life. And first, I could say, who is her boyfriend currently? But then I got confused in them. I'm uncertain if she remembered them all herself. So I wasn't surprised when Megan got pregnant. But just imagine this situation didn't upset her at all. She didn't seem to take it seriously. Megan laughed and said she didn't know who the lucky father of her child was. Don't worry, Megan smiled at me. When the baby is born, I'll look at him and immediately find the man to blame. When Peter was born, Megan almost immediately resumed her adventures. She often forgot that the baby needed to be fed, dressed, and taken care of. We all hoped that this little boy would bring out her maternal instincts, but no miracle happened. Megan remained the same carefree girl. Meanwhile, I took care of Peter, buying him diapers, formula, and toys. I fell behind in my studies and missed lectures, but there was no other option. Then Megan was absent for a whole week, and she finally returned. She gave me a note written in black and white saying that she was giving up the baby. She met a good man who had offered to marry her, but on one condition, there should be no child in their life. Megan asked me to take him to an orphanage since she didn't have time. She packed her things and left forever. I never saw her again, and I was left with her child in my arms. What else could I do? Give Peter to an orphanage? What if no one would adopt him? No way. I've also decided to leave. I retrieved my documents from the college and came back here. As you know, my hometown received me coldly. Everyone judged, scolded, and insulted me. But that's not the worst part. Peter is growing up, and I'm afraid he will be taken away from me one day. Yes, I'm used to thinking of him as my son, and no one besides you should know that it's not true. Do you hear me? Up? Promise me. He nodded quietly in agreement. Everything turned out fine. Megan didn't show up. Everyone in the dormitory thought that Peter was mine and didn't ask any extra questions. In general, no one cared about us except for the local gossips. But that worries me the least. What though you know everything? Decide for yourself if it's my fault. If I betrayed you, if I could have acted differently. And Rob, I know you won't marry me. Not everyone is capable of raising someone else's child. Believe me, I won't judge or accuse you. You're free from all promises. Go and be happy. Rob looked at Gemma for a long time, then left for the first time since her grandmother's death. Gemma cried bitterly and hopelessly like a child. Rob returned home and told his mother that he had sorted everything out and that no one would stop him from marrying Gemma. The mother looked at her son and sighed bitterly. She didn't know that soon she would come to love not only her little grandson, but also the kind daughter-in-law Gemma, who'd loved her son since childhood. Several days passed, and Gemma resigned herself to the fact that Rob had left her forever, and she didn't hold it against him. She understood that he couldn't be bound by obligations towards someone else's child. One day when Gemma was playing with her boy, there was a knock at the door. Rob was standing on the threshold with a huge bouquet of flowers and a big bag of gifts and toys. Peter peeked out from behind Gemma, and Rob smiled at him. "Want to mind your daddy, little one?" he said, and squatted down, hugged Peter tightly. "Let's ask Mom now if she'll marry me." Rob stood up and asked, looking at his beloved. "Gemma, will you marry me?" Gemma smiled and nodded, wiping away her tears. Several years passed. Right after the wedding, Rob and Gemma adopted Peter. Later, Gemma gave birth to another son and daughter. Happiness had long settled in their home. It rang with children's voices. Now no one dared insult Gemma, and the former gossipers lowered their heads when they saw this big and friendly family.